What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today I wanted to have a discussion about a topic that's been on my mind a lot lately, and this is content bloat in Call of Duty, and more specifically in Modern Warfare 3. At this stage in the game's lifecycle, especially when you factor in the carry forward from Modern Warfare 2, I really think we have a bit of a problem with too much content being in the game. And I know that might sound really strange to have an issue with, because it's much more common on the other end to have not enough content for a game, and the game will get really stale really quickly if you don't have enough content. And I would definitely rather have the issue of having too much content rather than not enough. I want to make that clear up front. However, in saying that, I think there is such a thing as having too much content because the game can really start to get overwhelming and there's just too much investment needed for the average player to be able to keep up with what's going on in the game. And this is the type of thing that can actually push them away from the game entirely. So in my opinion, there is actually a sweet spot when it comes to the level of content in a game. And I'm going to be separating this discussion into three main types of playable content. I'm not really talking about cosmetic content here. We're talking about playable content. And these three types that I think are most relevant to this discussion are guns, attachments, and maps. So let's start this off with the guns section. When it comes to guns in Call of Duty, there are really only so many regular weapon types that can be made before you start getting a little wacky with the weapons where you have to do like variable fire rates or laser guns or just something totally different. If we're just talking about regular guns that you would see in an FPS game, and with assault rifles, for instance, there's only so many roles to be filled there. Like you can have your low fire rate, high damage assault rifle, you have your moderate fire rate assault rifle, your high fire rate assault rifle, then you can go accurate or inaccurate within those, and then you could also include burst. You could have a fast burst or a slow burst. And at that point, once you have all those bases covered, you've basically got all of the main archetypes covered for your assault rifles. And once you start to get all of those weapon roles covered in a Call of Duty game, this is when you often start to see new guns that are added to the game that are extremely similar to a gun that's already there, but they do make a few changes just to make it slightly different at least. And when it comes to this, I do think it's unavoidable, especially with a game as a service. You want to keep adding new content as time goes on. And I do think it's very reasonable to have like 2 to 3 guns that are really similar to each other. They essentially fill the same role, but they have some slight differences between them. In saying that though, I think the problem starts to arise when you start getting like 4+ guns that are essentially the same with just minor differences. And just one example I want to pull out here. For Modern Warfare 3, in the game's current state, we're looking at before Season 4 at this point. With just one of these weapon roles, there are 9 full auto 5-shot kill assault rifles or kits that convert a different gun into an assault rifle that have a rate of fire between around 800 to 857 rounds per minute. So with all of those guns, they effectively fill the same role. They've got a very similar time to kill potential. They're all killing in 5 shots. The rate of fire is roughly the same, and you'll see some variance in the recoil as well as the range values. But at the end of the day, they all fill that same sort of role. And when you run into that sort of situation, this is where guns start to lose a lot of their character. Like I think all the way back to Black Ops 2, I can distinctly remember every single gun in that game because every gun in Black Ops 2 filled its own unique role. And maybe there was a little bit of overlap with 1 or 2 guns here or there, but it was minimal. We didn't have 4+ assault rifles that had a really similar rate of fire and time to kill value. At most, you might have had a couple guns that were fairly similar. Whereas when I think to some of the more recent Call of Duty games that are much more fresh in my memory, I can't name nearly as many guns because they don't have that same character. They all kind of blend in with each other. And especially with Modern Warfare 3, things have gotten very overwhelming when it comes to guns. Like when you think of those 9 full auto 5-shot kill assault rifles, how is the average player supposed to keep up with which one of those 9 guns is currently the best to use right now for a given situation? Especially after various patches that have taken place where they're constantly buffing and nerfing and bringing new guns into the equation. This is just overboard in my opinion, and it's very overwhelming, not only for the players to keep up with, but it also must be overwhelming for the developers to keep up with this. Because it's tricky to keep things reasonably balanced power-wise, while ensuring that each gun has its own unique feel without having the exact same stats as the similar guns in the same role. And this has led to a lot of complaints about certain guns being way too weak or other guns being too powerful. Personally, I actually think they're doing a pretty good job with general weapon balance in the game, considering the fact that we've got well over 100 weapons, especially if you start factoring in the conversion kits that are effectively like a new gun. I think they're doing about as good of a job as you could expect with that many weapons in the equation. Sure, there's definitely room for improvement. There are still many guns that are just way too weak and there's no reason to ever use them. And then on the other end, there are some guns that I would say are maybe a little bit too powerful. Although I don't think anything's so insanely overpowered that there's like no reason to use any other guns in the game. I could easily name 20 guns in this game that I could perform equally as well with in public matches. So So I don't think they're doing a terrible job considering the situation they're in, but the situation that they are in definitely makes things a lot more difficult for them to balance things properly to ensure that everything is viable. So when it comes to guns in Modern Warfare 3, I absolutely think we've got way too much bloat here, but it's a situation that was essentially unavoidable with content carry forward. I think this was the biggest thing that led to this situation, because with Modern Warfare 3 being marketed as a full game and not just a DLC for Modern Warfare 2, they of course needed to bring in a full weapon lineup that would be appropriate for a full Call of Duty release, which they did. If we didn't have content carry forward for this when it comes to guns, Modern Warfare 3's weapon lineup would have been perfectly fine to start with at least, and not really out of the ordinary for a Call of Duty game. But the issue with carry forward is all of the typical roles were already filled multiple times over by the Modern Warfare 2 guns, and now you're piling all the Modern Warfare 3 guns on top of that. And so with content carry forward being a thing, I think this was an unavoidable situation that they ended up in, and unfortunately, I don't think there's a good solution for Modern Warfare 3. The content is already here, you can't take that content away. That would be a horrible thing for them to just suddenly start taking guns out of the equation. And I think they have to continue adding new guns and new aftermarket parts to keep things reasonably fresh, and in doing so, they're going to create even more overlap on the roles and therefore less weapon character. So unfortunately, this is going to be a situation we're stuck with for the rest of Modern Warfare 3. I will say there are bigger problems to have with a game than too much content, so it's not the worst thing in the world, but I do think this is creating some issues and pushing many people away from the game. Next, let's talk a little bit about attachments, because this is what I consider to be another fairly big issue when it comes to content bloat in Modern Warfare 3. Because similar to guns, it is good to have a variety of attachments that fill unique roles so you can tailor a setup to what your intended playstyle is. But when you have too many similar ones with just slight changes, it once again becomes overwhelming and bloated even when you have the advanced stats screen present. I mean, that at least helps a lot, but it's still an issue in my eyes. And on top of this, having too many attachments in the game, I think can lead to the issue of a lack of character, not only in the attachments, but also with the weapons that you're using. I mean, if you have so many options with your attachments that you can turn any gun into essentially however you want it to play, it will take away from the character of that weapon. If you have a gun type, for instance, that doesn't really suit your playstyle all that much, but with attachments, you can just turn it into a gun that does suit your playstyle, it's really similar to another gun that already suits your playstyle, then you don't have to adapt your playstyle to learn how to use that gun properly, you're just adapting the gun to fit your playstyle. And out of those two options, one of them is very uninteresting. It's just something you do in the menus by creating your class setup, whereas the other is something you're doing with your gameplay. You have to actually adapt your gameplay and learn how to play in different ways, which is much more interesting and would lead to much more depth to the gameplay experience. And when you scroll through some of the attachment categories in Modern Warfare 3, you can clearly see the crazy levels of bloat that we've got here. And in many cases, so many of these attachments are almost exactly the same as another attachment with just some slight differences, and oftentimes there's a clear winner with each of those attachment types, which means there's a bunch of attachments that are just generally not going to be used because they're statistically inferior. And what's the point of having all of these statistically inferior attachments if they're just going to be ignored by the vast majority of players? The only point I can think of is for cosmetic changes. If you want to make a gun look a certain way while ignoring the statistics of the attachments, that's one benefit to having all these attachments. But in that case, I think there's a better method of handling this. Personally, I'd love to see them consolidate several of the attachment types. So in each attachment category, we only have a handful of choices that are statistically different from each other. So for underbarrel grips, for instance, instead of having 20 different angled grips in the game, that for the most part at least are going to affect similar stats but just in slightly different ways, let's cut that rate down to 2 different types of angled grips that maybe do something slightly different from each other. And then, in order to maintain our control over the cosmetics of the gun, if we want an angled grip, allow us to choose one of those 2 depending on the stats that we're looking for, and then from there, we can customize the look of those angled grips. So you could still have the same number of cosmetic options out there, but simplify the choice a little bit when it comes to how it's going to impact the performance of the gun. And if anything, this would allow for a lot more customization of your gun cosmetically, because you would no longer have to sacrifice the stats that you're looking for in order to get that perfect look that you're also looking for. Now with this example, I just want to clarify, I'm specifically just talking about angled grips. I'm not saying we should only have 2 underbarrel grips to choose from. I think like 2 different angled grips, 2 different vertical grips, and then maybe a few miscellaneous grips that wouldn't really fall into that category of either angled or vertical grips. So you'd still have a decent number of choices as far as how you want to customize your gun statistically, without those options being totally overwhelming by having to scroll through like 40 different underbarrels. Personally, I think that would be a solid solution within the current gunsmith model to ensure that we're still getting tons of cosmetic options there. Again, this is an area where I think it's too late for Modern Warfare 3, but this is more so looking forward in the Call of Duty franchise. I think something like that could work really well. But finally, let's talk a little bit about maps and content bloat. And this is an area that I think is quite a bit different from weapons and attachments. Generally speaking, when it comes to maps, I think more is better as long as quality isn't sacrificed to get more maps. So with Modern Warfare 3, for instance, I don't think we are at the point where we have too many maps in the game or anything like that. And I'm looking forward to even more being added. Really, the only downsides I can think of with having too many maps in a game, though, is first off, quality is a concern. The more maps that you get in the same period of time means that they might be spending less time optimizing each one of those maps and getting them into a really good place. So that is a potential concern, but I've got to say, with Modern Warfare 3, I don't feel like this has been the case at all. I'm actually very happy with the post-launch maps we've been getting for the most part. There might be one or two that I'm not a big fan of in there, but most of them, I'm actually really happy with the post-launch maps. I actually think they're some of the best maps in the game and some of the best maps in recent years of Call of Duty. As for another potential downside of having too many maps in rotation is you may not get to see specific maps that you really like to play nearly as often. So just for an example, let's take my playtime for instance. I only play Call of Duty about 6 hours a week, and in that 6 hours, if there's a specific map that I want to play, if I'm playing quick play, I'd like to see my favorite map pop up at least a couple times in that week of playtime. And if you end up having way too many maps in rotation, the odds of finding your favorite map are going to be pretty slim. And then finally, another downside I can think of with too many maps in the game is simply the file size. Maps contribute quite a bit to the game's file size in general, much more than guns and attachments do. But for the most part, like I said, when it comes to maps, more is generally better as long as quality isn't sacrificed. So there we go. That's just a topic that's been on my mind a lot lately, and I wanted to cover that. At the end of the day, I think a certain base level of content is absolutely needed for a Call of Duty game, and not having enough is a much bigger problem than having too much. In saying that though, having too much can lead to problems, and I think we're definitely experiencing that with Modern Warfare 3. I've been seeing plenty of comments from people that just can't keep up, they're overwhelmed, and instead of diving in deeper to try to stay on top of that stuff, many of them are going the alternative route, which is just checking out of the game entirely because they can't keep up, and they either don't want to or don't have the extra time to commit to the game. And looking forward, I suspect we're getting a clean slate with no carry forward going into Black Ops 6, or that's what at least it's rumored to be called at this stage. And this is something I'm really looking forward to. I can't wait to start from scratch with a game again, with a much more limited pool of weapons that aren't completely overboard. Hopefully attachments as well are going to be simplified a lot more, and we don't have attachments from 2 different games thrown into one game. And honestly, even cosmetically, I'm hoping for a big reset. I think things have gotten pretty crazy on the cosmetic side as well. We're at the point now where it seems like more often than not, you're playing somebody that's in a Halloween costume or isn't even human. And while I mainly care about gameplay, it is still something that gets a little bit on my nerves. And I'm looking forward to a full reset and clean slate when it comes to all of this content with the next Call of Duty game. Now, of course, these are all just my thoughts, and I'd love to hear what you guys think about this topic in those comments down below. How are you feeling about the current state of content in Modern Warfare 3? Do you think we're currently experiencing content bloat and there's too much going on and it's overwhelming? Or do you think there should be no limits to this and more content is always going to be better? Just let me know down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.